I'm Ben Ryman, and this is Behavior Speak. In this episode, Elif Chorengel, a behavior analyst with over a decade of experience, shares her journey from Turkey to America and then to Germany, where she established her own applied behavior analysis service. This discussion covers the evolution of ABA in Germany, challenges related to training and certification, funding mechanisms for services, the process of diagnosis, and the current landscape of autism awareness and inclusion in German society. Welcome, Elif.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, stoked. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge I'm producing this podcast on the territories of the Klamath, Klehu, Samoko, and Comox First Nations. Grateful to be here. So, Elif, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, my name is Elif. I am a behavior analyst, and I have been working in the field for the past 12 years, working primarily with autistic children and adolescents. I was born in Turkey, where I spent the first few years of my life, but not remembering much to reflect back on that today. At around 9 years old, my family decided to move to the States, navigating the challenges of building a new home base for us in a new culture, in a new country. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, where I spent my formative years going through elementary school up to college. I graduated from Montclair State University, which is the second biggest state university in New Jersey, with my bachelor's in psychology. I started my career in 2012, right after graduation, working as a behavior therapist in an early intervention center in New York. In 2016, I officially moved to Germany, which is where I am today, and worked several years as a traveling behavior consultant, training families who had autistic children. After 7 years, so I did that for 7 years, and after 7 years, I took a short break from practicing until I started my own company, Focus Autism, at the end of last year, and I'm currently practicing as the only ABA service provider in Bremen, which is where I live with my husband.
Wow. Okay. So let's go back early. So what made your family move from Turkey to the States?
I think my dad had business connections in the States, and they knew that we might have a better future just growing up, attending school in the States. So that was.
So what was that like when you were to be 9 years old moving to the States from Turkey?
Well, it wasn't easy. Like I said, I don't remember much, but I remember having friends and leaving them and, leaving family behind. That was, it wasn't a challenge. Like I said, I don't really remember, but yeah. And then I was pretty excited because all I heard about the States was the Disney World. And I thought, I guess that's where I was going. It didn't end up being like that for some years. Eventually ended up going, but yeah, I guess overall I was excited.
So then was English something you learned in Turkey?
Yes. So yeah, it's a requirement, I think. I also went to private school in Turkey.
Oh, I see.
So I started learning English starting from first grade.
Early. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Right on. Okay. So then New Jersey, going to school, how did you find the behavior therapist sort of role? How'd you get there?
So that was during my final semester at Montclair. I was anxious about life after graduation, eager to gain work experience. I started talking to or mentioning this to several of my professors, and one of them said he was working at an early intervention center. He was doing behavior analytic research, and he invited me for an interview. Having no prior knowledge of ABA, I picked him up on an opportunity and went in for the interview, and I was immediately offered a position. I guess the demand for behavior therapists was high back then as well. Yeah, this was back in 2012, and there were no RBTs. There was no 40-hour structured training. I got a 6-week training and started working with kids from 16 months to 4 years old, so basically until they graduated.
Gotcha. Okay, and then what made you relocate to Germany?
A couple of reasons. I had personal connections here in Germany. My best friend lived here at the time. We went to high school and college together in the States, and she moved here and I kind of followed her. And I was looking at jobs here in Germany and found the company that I worked at for several years, and I really wanted it. I really wanted the job. I had to learn German for the position. I couldn't even say yes or no. So that took me about 10 months.
Wow.
I went to language school for 10 months, and yeah, I really wanted the job, and I got it.
And so what was the job doing this kind of work?
Yes, traveling, working as a behavior consultant was the position.
So did you, maybe I missed a piece there. So when did you sort of make the move from, what's sort of the journey from behavior therapist to BCBA?
Well, I'm not a BCBA. I went to Queen's University, Belfast. I did my graduate study there. So I had my master's while still working as a behavioral consultant. I also eventually got my BCABA and IBA, but I did not make the cutoff for the international changes that the BACB made. So yeah, I was this close to taking my BCBA exam, but it never really happened.
No, I'm coming in with presumptions because I've done a few interviews now with folks kind of in European countries. Most of the stories have been either these are really new folks in the field, and like I recently interviewed someone who's just working towards their IBA in Slovenia, and she's kind of the first. But then I've interviewed other folks that were like the only BCBAs in the countries, either because they moved there or they just became certified there. But I haven't, and so yeah, I just assumed sort of pre-2022 that anyone going over to Europe to be a behavior analyst would have been a BCBA, but that's not the case.
That's not the case with me.
Yeah. So what were you doing? What you said you were a traveling behavior analyst? Were you just traveling around Germany, or?
Yes. So I got my base somewhere in South Germany, and I did that for a couple of years, and I was traveling. So the structure of the company was that every behavior consultant basically got their region, and I kind of had the southern region. So I was traveling just all over that part of the country, just visiting families or visiting school staff at schools and doing a lot of parent training, basically. Essentially, that was what we were doing, parent training.
Okay. Well, let's talk about a little more about ABA in Germany. So from what you know, what's sort of the ABA story in Germany? When did ABA come to Germany, and what were some of the beginnings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, ABA did not gain exposure until the early 2000s. Prior to that, it was basically very much psychoanalytically oriented. I guess in some parts it still is. But yeah, I think from my understanding, the view on autism was more or less like a psychiatric disorder. It wasn't very much understood, and it still isn't in some parts of the country. I'm getting a lot of requests to train actually people, but to kind of go back to the history of ABA, from my knowledge, like I said, it started in the early 2000s, where we see a slow shift into just behavioral oriented interventions. In 2004, Robert and Nadine Schramm started their own company, Knospe ABA, which is the company I worked for several years. And at the time, it was just the two of them traveling the entire country and training families on ABA. And at the time, they were the only ABA service provider. And I think, and I hope, I mean, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I think he was the only BCBA in the country back then. And this was 2004. So I think with that, the country started to see a lot more just recognition, the healthcare providers and the educational institutions. And there was a steady but a slow increase in services available at the time then. Yeah, and I think so mid 2000s, through Roberts and Nadine's work of dissemination, they started providing ABA workshops and trainings to professionals and to parents. And they very much then started to adapt ABA principles to the German language and to the cultural context, which was very important.
And so,
yeah.
And so, how long are they still there?
Their company's here. They're still based here. They're still they're very much still active.
Right. Yeah.
And they've branched out actually to a more center-based services. Like I said, we used to do home-based, in-home services, and now they've branched out to center-based services serving both German families as well as American military families.
And so, what is sort of are there sort of training programs? Like how can folks sort of become behavior analysts in Germany and become sort of certified? Or I guess maybe the first question is there even a recognition of certification in Germany?
No, that still hasn't changed since I first started. So I started in 2006.
Yeah.
And like you said, I started with a bachelor and that was possible. I was hired and I was working as a behavior consultant. That might not be the case in the US, right? Or in Canada, but that's still pretty much valid even now. So when introduce ourselves or to the social services here or healthcare providers, we say we are BCBAs or IBAs. I mean, it doesn't have any value to them, that certification, because they don't know what that is. So there is no training here in Germany to become a behavior analyst. A lot of the trainings and education that we get is still outside of Germany. A lot of the professionals still look to the US. They travel to the US or they do online coursework. I did my graduate study through the online path. I did it remotely. And yeah, that's basically the only way to do it in Germany. You would have to go back to the US, come back, and then say you're a CBA.
Gotcha. And are your services, like, how do folks pay for your services? Is it all private pay, or do you have a credential with the International Behavior Analysis Organization, the Qualified Applied Behavior Analysis Credentialing Board, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or would like a certificate of attendance for another organization? You can earn continuing education units by going to www.behaviorspeak.com, clicking on CEUs, and entering the 3 secret words. First secret word is focus.
It could be private pay, but the services are paid through the social services department or youth welfare office is what it's really called. Yes, there was a law that was put into place in 2002, which is called the Act of Equal Opportunities of Persons with Disabilities. Allowed us to, well, basically what it did was, I'm just going to get a little bit technical, but what it did was, to answer your question, I have to go back a little, like a few steps to kind of provide a whole, like a big picture kind of framework of the legal system here. So that act was established to prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities and promote their right to inclusion in society and access to services. And Germany ensures that these rights are put into place through concrete support measures by its social welfare system, and which are called the social codes in Germany. Social code is basically Germany's legal framework for social welfare and benefits, where 2 sections, Social Code 8 and Social Code 9, are dedicated to rehabilitation, participation, social assistance for people with disabilities. And these codes were modified and strengthened through the reform of Federal Participation Act. And this reform focuses on strengthening participation and self-determination and reforming integration assistance. And through this Federal Participation Act, autistic individuals had better access to services and funding for therapies and assisted living and employment. So this is all under the social welfare system, and that's how we actually get paid. And the only way we can get paid is that if we basically prove as ABA providers that we elevate disadvantages and build skills and integrate the autistic individuals or the clients that we serve into the society, we're basically then, they're legally bound to provide us funding.
Right. Okay, so I get that. That makes sense. And I've heard sort of versions of that story in other countries around this sort of need to sort of prove that what you're doing works before you get paid. I know in some countries it goes so far as sort of, it's almost like a human rights tribunal where they have to, literally go to a whole panel and convince every parent needs to do this for their child and so on. Does it look like that? Or because when you talk about sort of, it takes sometimes it takes a while for sort of, interventions to help someone get to the point where they're integrating in society and doing those sorts of things. It's not like you have to work with a family for 10 years and get them integrated in society, then you finally get paid, is it?
No. But I think through the structure that we have, or the essence of our work, we basically say, we can do this. We're trained to do this. We base our interventions on empirical data. It's evidence-based. We were trained. We know what we're doing. And so and obviously when we then do say we're available, I'm available, I don't have a wait list, I can take you on, I've done this for a while, then I mean, it's still technically up to them to say no. You're not qualified for funding, or for whatever reason.
So it's still sort of the case that each family that wants to get services for their child needs to sort of get approved to have ABA services covered. It's not sort of...
No, it's not. Yeah. So they have to, it might be a battle, it might be a challenge, especially if that social welfare office does not know the provider. But if the service or the service provider or an ABA provider has built that relationship, they've basically laid out their services and their structure and how they work, and I think it's just a little bit easier. But I've known families that went through the whole legal system. They went to court and they sued the state for not providing funding for the services.
So certainly one of the goals for your new company, which hasn't been around that long, is building these relationships with these social welfare offices.
And that's exactly what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
So what does sort of before we get to that, does that then also potentially, because we know about the importance of sort of early intervention and whatnot, can that process sort of delay intervention for families and potentially maybe miss out on some of those early years of treatment because you're waiting to get approved?
So yes and no. Well, while you're waiting to get ABA services, you might not be getting ABA, but there's still educational services available to those families that are waiting to get ABA, which is available through an institution or through school. So kids, and I'm talking about my state here, so kids who are not school aged, right? We're talking about kindergarten, we're talking about preschool. They have available services available to them. They're kind of psychological and educational approaches to services, right? They might get OT, they might get speech, they might get sensory integration therapy, it might be play therapy.
Right.
But it's definitely not as individualized as we might provide services.
Sure. What is sort of the process for folks, or what's diagnosis like in Germany, and what sort of access to diagnosis, and is it easy for families to get diagnoses and then start getting services? And do they need diagnoses to start getting services?
Yes. So the process to getting a diagnosis is families going to their pediatrician or a family physician and voicing their concerns about their child's progress development, right? And then they're either referred to a child psychiatrist or a pediatric center, which are specialized outpatient clinics where a multidisciplinary team evaluates the child, provides a diagnosis and a therapy plan, which, like I said, includes OT, speech therapy, integration therapy, and individualized autism therapies, what they essentially call it here. And these outpatient clinics provide the diagnosis, and they're really important in terms of coordinating everything for the family from the initial steps until the termination of services. And yes, the families, especially for ABA services, do need a diagnosis, an autism diagnosis, to be eligible for funding through the state.
And so then how do folks get to you?
Good question. because I'm still in the process of building my client base. And what I'm doing right now is just a lot of advertisement, right? I'm talking to people, I'm handing out flyers, and I'm reaching out to child psychiatrists, I'm reaching out to social welfare offices, and I am just talking to a lot of people. I'm reaching out to schools who provide inclusion and I'm reaching out to institutions who provide school staff and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I am specialized in autism. I am available to provide services. I don't have a wait list. Or I say I do trainings if you're interested in autism and want to know more. So yeah, so that's basically just building a lot of connections. And like I said, basically, if you're really connected to your local youth welfare office, then you're pretty much in. So yeah.
And is there like are there a lot of providers in Germany? I know you talked about um, the one you kind of started with, but has that expanded? Are there a lot of folks providing ABA now? Is there enough folk providers or that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So since KNUSPE ABA started, there has been multiple companies that opened up. I have to say, I think Robert was the one who trained most of the behavior analysts here in Germany. I mean, not the ones obviously coming from overseas, but the ones who were actually here. So yeah, so they're actually, I think the last time I went through the providers in Germany, I think there are somewhere between 13 to 15 ABA service providers. Some of them are big multi-location companies who, like I said, provide services for American military families, but also German families, to small business owners like myself. And yeah, some of them are consultants, behavior analysts, or BCBAs or BCABAs or IBAs now. So yeah, it's definitely growing, which is, yeah, pretty hopeful in terms of, kind of expanding ABA services here in Germany.
What's sort of we'll come back to ABA in a second, but what's sort of the maybe general kind of perception of autism in Germany is in terms of sort of autism awareness and acceptance? Where are the people at?
It's very mixed. You'll see people, you'll see professionals, you'll see families who have a lot of knowledge and know exactly what it is. And you'll have people who'll ask, what is it? How can I recognize someone on the street who has autism, right? I mean, it's just a whole spectrum of knowledge here. So it just really depends on how informed people are. And the only way that they are informed, the ones who are informed, are then actually they themselves have or know someone who has autism. But if you have nothing to do with the topic, then it's pretty much autism, Rain Man. That's it.
Yeah. You talked about kind of some of the frameworks and the laws and things that have kind of come into place to sort of require services around and sort of this focus on inclusion. How new are those laws? And sort of how is sort of this it's one thing to have laws around inclusion, but is there sort of that culture of inclusion in Germany? Do folks want to have folks in community and support that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, inclusion in schools, for example, and I can only talk about northern Germany, which is where I'm at, and I have most of my knowledge here. Then it goes back to, I think, 2013 and 14, where they actually started closing down schools who were serving or who had students who had learning difficulties, right? They had diagnosis, they were autistic, but they had learning difficulties, right? They started to close down those schools and basically provided inclusion through the general education system. So those kids who are autistic but have learning difficulties or social emotional challenges and who are able to attend school with or without a school aid, they're in the general public education system here in Germany, well, in northern Germany. And that was around, I think it started 2013, 2014. Special education schools are still available to students who have a motor or physical disability or an intellectual disability, right? And then they have another diagnosis where they have more challenges than just learning and or social emotional.
Right.
So it's still pretty new. Like I said, it started in 2013. Some schools have a complete inclusion system, and some of them still working on it. And I think the last schools were closed down in 2018, 2019. We're not talking about 20 years, right? So relatively new. And I think in southern Germany, it's still, I'm not sure if they have a similar system, but I don't know if they have the same inclusion system that we do have in northern Germany.
I don't know anything about Germany, so why is it so different? I mean, Germany doesn't seem like that big of a place, so.
It's not. It has a population of 80 million people, but it's separated into 16 federal states.
Okay.
And every federal state is just like in the US. They basically have their own laws.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew that.
That's where the differences come in.
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah, and sometimes that also affects how ABA services are funded. There's some cities, there's some regions like Munich. I don't want to hate on Munich, but it's pretty challenging to get ABA services in Munich because they just have a different structure and system. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
It might have changed since I lived around that region.
Right. Wow. That's interesting. So what about ABA? What sort of, kind of talked about sort of, that folks don't know a lot about certification or maybe necessarily care a lot about certification when they're providing funding and whatnot, but they seem to still provide funding eventually for things. What's sort of the perception of ABA in Germany? I mean, especially kind of at this day and age when I think the whole world is sort of struggling with a lot of the conversations around ABA and some of the sketchy things that happened in the past.
Yeah, and they're also true here. And I think they've just kind of traveled over oceans and those misconceptions. And obviously what happened in the past just kind of got here. And ABA definitely did not have a good reputation here. And if we're talking about the current state, I think it's still very mixed. You'll have people who know exactly what ABA is, and they've either experienced it or they've seen it, or they've had a first-hand interaction with what it actually is, or you'll have people who've heard about it, right? And then they'll have, right, a lot of ABA is it's dog training, and it's a lot of it's compliance based. It tries to change the person, the autistic individual, which then leads them to mask actually who they are, right? But then you'll also have people who have positive experiences and, where their lives have been changed because those services were available, or you'll have people who've heard about ABA and who've only heard about good things because they were in some shape or form informed through research or through someone they knew. So it's still very mixed, but overall, maybe I'm being very optimistic here, but there's an upward trend. It's changing.
Right.
More services are being available. When I first started my company and started kind of introducing myself to the state, to the social welfare office, to the youth office, I was very nervous that they were not gonna fund my services, or that I thought that was gonna be like a big hurdle to getting services, to getting funding for my services, which did not happen. I mean, they looked at my application because you have to apply to be able to get funding, and they looked at my website, and I'm pretty honest. I'm pretty open. I disclose everything. I disclose my services. I say I do ABA. I'm proud to say it. And that wasn't even a topic of conversation. So I'm very optimistic that that's not going to be in the way. But there are other things that are getting in the way right now for me, but that is not one of them. So I'm assuming that here in Bremen, where I live, people are very much open or coming from like a they don't have any misconceptions or knowledge of what ABA is. So it's different.
So tell me a bit about that association, when it was formed, and kind of how many folks are there, and the kind of work you're doing there. The second secret word is Germany.
Yeah. So the Association for Behavior Analysis Germany, Deutschland, we go by ABAD. It was established in 2011 with the mission of contributing and supporting the development of behavior analysis in research and application in Germany and in German-speaking countries. We are currently, and all the work that we do is volunteer work. And we're currently 5 board members who are serving as conference planning committee members / board members. In 2022, we became an ACE provider, and we have been offering webinars, and we've been offering annual conferences. And yeah, we got to have really great speakers for the conferences, for the webinars. And yeah, that's also my role, right? I'm a conference planning committee member, and we do just a lot of the organization for webinars and conferences.
So how many members do you figure you have?
Gosh, I want to say somewhere around 50. 50, between 50 and 60.
Yeah, and you said
I did not study for this answer.
No, that's okay. And I think you had said before did you say you had 13 to 15 providers, or was it 30 to 50?
No, 13, somewhere between 13 to 15.
15 providers, right?
Yeah.
So that probably makes sense to have sort of that many folks. So that's not a lot of folks practicing. I mean, it's 50 or so behavior analysts.
No, we have a lot more than people who are actually members or who are members at our board. We have, the last time I checked, and this was like a couple months ago, so I'm not sure if these numbers are accurate. Yeah. We have 71 BCBAs, 9 BCABAs, and 12 RBTs in Germany, and we also have 3 IBTs and 30 IBAs in Germany. So we have a lot of people, and I think a lot of people are coming in, moving from the States to Germany.
But that's still not a lot. I mean, so let's just say we got 120, 130 behavior analysts, and a few folks below. If kind of like where I live in British Columbia, Canada. And by the way, I think the U.S. is really the only place that's regulated. Even in British Columbia, you can have a bachelor's degree. I know behavior consultants with high school diplomas here. Oh yeah, Ontario, the province of Ontario is the only province that has any regulation, and that only happened less than 12 months ago. Last summer, I believe, they officially became licensed, and it's amazing. They're a model for us, and I think BC is hopefully a few years away, not too long. We've been working on it for about 15 years. But yeah, it's so that's one sort of piece. But I was going to say we have, I think in BC we have maybe a couple hundred BCBAs, and we only have like 5 million people here, right? And so and Canada as a whole has, like around 40 million people, right?
Yeah.
And so thinking that you have 80 million people, and I'm presuming autism rates are probably similar in Germany as they are sort of everywhere in the world. Autism doesn't seem to have much of a, it doesn't matter where you are, the rates seem to be pretty high.
Yeah.
And so I would hazard a guess that there's no shortage of need for services in Germany, or for there's no shortage of clients. Like nobody's probably going without.
No, not at all.
A lot of people are going without. Sort of no professionals are going without. Like it shouldn't be hard to get a full caseload.
No, yeah, for sure, definitely. I mean, I know a lot of my colleagues who have their own companies as well. They have, some of them have a wait list from 1 to 2 years.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then refer them out, those clients, to other companies who also have 6-month wait lists. So yeah, And so
is ABA Deutschland doing work to sort of try to increase capacity in Germany of providers? And
Definitely, for sure. I mean, a lot of our work is dissemination of the science, of the work we do, of making sure that there's ethical service delivery and professional development, but we're not specifically recruiting people, but just, you've seen my social media posts. So that's one of the actions that we take to kind of promote and kind of foster knowledge about the work we do about behavior analysis in Germany, and hope that we get more people coming in. And like I said, you don't have to be a BCBA as long as you have some experience, as long as you have some training. And even then, if you come with no training, you'll be trained. So yeah.
So
and ABD, we provide a lot of the webinars and the conferences, and where people actually get to make new connections. And yeah.
And so probably the biggest barrier, I suppose, for outside folks would be learning the language.
Yes. So if you do want to work with German families, you do have to learn the language. I had to do it. I took a language course. I might have done it without it, but I wanted to kind of get it right and get hired really fast. So I kind of went through, and I had the time, and so I kind of went through that official route. But yeah. But like I said, some of those companies do serve American families. So even if you don't have the language now, you can start providing services to English-speaking families. And we have a lot of those here, and they don't even have to be American families, right? We have other cultures here who maybe their primary language is not English, and they also need help. So you can start off with English-speaking families and then work your way up.
How difficult was it to learn German?
It was hard. It was hard. The first 3 months, I thought I could do it. I came home from language school crying, thinking that maybe this is not it. But I just had a personal interest. I love languages. I love cultures. And for some reason, don't ask me why, I always wanted to learn German. Always. As a kid, as a child. So I guess after that 3-month period, it was just kind of uphill. It was, or downhill. It just got easier. If I could do it, you could do it. So if anyone who's listening is interested in moving to Germany, you can do it. It's not that bad.
Now, you mentioned that a lot of folks can work in the field without any is ABAD kind of pushing to change that, though? Is there sort of a long-term goal of some kind of regulation? Because that can be dangerous when you have providers that aren't educated or maybe aren't supervised or whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. I mean, that is one of the things that a topic that keeps coming up when we have meetings. We would love to have a regulated board, a certification system, but I don't think we're there yet. I think we just need a group of people who come together and actually fight through the system and kind of just get it recognized here in each state, even if it's not an each state kind of thing. And if it's just like a national kind of system, then I mean, I think it would take a lot of work. But like I said, as an association, it's definitely something that we keep discussing, that something we would love to do.
I mean, it sounds like is this something that could even happen? And again, not understanding politics or anything in Germany at all. Is it something that could happen maybe on a state level and not a federal level potentially?
Potentially. But the fact that we all live in different states just makes the workload just so much more. We do have,
right,
I think, 2 members who live in the same state where they can kind of split up the workload. But for me, I would have to kind of do it on my own as like a side project.
Because you're essentially the only provider there.
Yes. As an ABA, like a true ABA provider, I'm the only one here in this city, in this state as well, because Bremen is a city and a state on its own. And we're 500,000 people here.
Gotcha. Wow.
That's small, but we're 500,000.
Now the IBA and the IBAO is gotten more active sort of since 2022. So is something maybe you're working on or other folks are working on there to sort of provide, sort of training through that route and to try to provide sort of maybe some like a German pathway with like German translated things and so on?
I think that was in the works, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm a big supporter of the IBAO. I'm an IBA myself, and that's exactly what I'm doing as like a transition to, or while we're waiting for our own certification here in Germany. I think that's one of the certifications, the certification, the regulated system that we can promote to train people. I've been just getting a lot of questions here and there about my initials behind my name. What is an IBA? Or
Sure.
I've been approached a couple weeks ago, actually, from a group of therapists who practice here not far away from me, a couple of streets down. They don't do essentially ABA, but something similar to that. They use behavior analytic principles, and they've been interested to be trained as an IBA. So there's a discussion about that. I might be training a couple of therapists here to become either IBTs or IBAs. I think it's really important.
Well, tell me more about Focus and why you started your own company and some of the services you provide.
Yeah. So my company, Focus Autism, Focus Autismus in German, I started at the end of last year because I saw a real gap in services and evidence-based information about autism in my community. I wanted to fill that need by creating workshops and family trainings and making quality care more accessible. And that's something that it's important to me during the initial stages that my services are not costly. Number one, for me to be able to get funding, first of all, and two, I just want to be able to provide services. I want people to know. I want families to access evidence-based interventions and procedures, and so that's something that's really important to me. So I provide a lot of workshops to institutions or professionals, and my services are essentially telehealth. So work from home, but I do provide the option for cases that are not suitable for telehealth that I do in-home services as well.
The last secret word is inclusion. And is it just you? Do you have RBTs, IBTs that work under you, or have you had some sort of work with some of your families?
Yeah, no, it's just me. It's just me for now. That would be wonderful in the future, and that's something that, I might consider along the way if I am not able to serve all the families, but for now it's just me.
So how many families are you? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I think it might be a lot easier for me to get funding if I actually had employees, because that is one of the problems, one of the challenges I'm facing here with the youth welfare office here, because one of the requirements I have is I have to have a location. So I have to be center-based and I have to have staff, which I have not. I don't have any of those. So I don't think it's impossible. And I'm still working with them to kind of find a way and for them to fund my services. But it hasn't been easy. It's been a challenge. They want a service provider who's actually center-based.
Yeah. That seems kind of restrictive because, I think something we know about our work is to do things sort of in the more natural environment, to do things in people's homes is going to be, potentially way more effective and sustainable than trying to do something in the center and transfer it out.
Totally. And that was one of my arguments, actually. But I think it's a case of ethical standards for them and supervision. So I think that's a problem, or quality control. They want to be able to send an employee to my center and say, okay, right, this is exactly what she's doing and everything's fine. But in a home or a home-based setting, they haven't been able to find a way that's also possible. I've invited them. I said, you're more than welcome to come to and sit in one of my sessions as long as the family's okay with it and observe my work. So yeah, like I said, we're still in discussion. I'm happy that they're open. I'm happy that they did not say no. So yeah, we'll see.
So what's sort of the 5-year plan?
The 5-year plan. I know this sounds crazy, but I would love to have a wait list as well. I would love just to be able to say my services are very well accepted, that I have so many clients knocking on my door to provide to have access to these services that I can say, okay, maybe I need a partner, or maybe I say I need a therapist who works under me. So yeah, that's I guess the 5-year plan. And another 5-year plan is just really disseminate the science of behavior analysis and kind of debunk the misconceptions about ABA. I mean, the history might not be clean, I have to say. I mean, I come from when I was first trained back in 2012. I was trained in compliance-based strategies, right? So I get it. But I think modern ABA is embracing and evolving and embracing more compassionate-based, culturally responsive care, asset-based, right? We don't hold our clients anymore physically, so they can match a picture. And I want people to see what ABA, ethical ABA truly is.
It's awesome. Exciting times.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of work, but it's great. I mean, I'm very much grateful to be able to do this and actually do it through my own company.
Elif, thanks for sharing your story and telling us a little about autism and ABA in Germany.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, awesome. I've had the privilege of interviewing behavior analysts from across Europe. Check out some of these amazing behavior analysts, starting with episode 216, Behavior Analysis in Slovenia with Maja Simjanovski. Episode 208, Behavior Analysis in Greece with Stefania Zempanka. Episode 191, Behavior Analysis in Belarus with Hanna Kalanuskaya. Episode 184, Behavior Analysis in Ukraine with Ala Maskalets. And episode 175, Autism in Serbia with Maria Kolic. Podcasts. And please follow us on Instagram @BehaviorSpeak.